department. I never imagined it would matter again. But after the merger, after Hale's cronies took over, I started digging through old archives just to see what had survived the digital transition. That's when I found it buried in microfilm storage, labeled Trent Financing, 1993. The note still existed. And the callable clause, it had never been closed. The clause stated that if the original note holder or their designated successor formally invoked repayment, the bank had 90 days to produce the full 10 million principal plus accrued interest at 7% per annum, compounded quarterly. I did the math that night, scrolling figures across my dining table until the numbers blurred into something beautiful and terrifying. The total came to just over $48.7 million. Now, most people would have stopped there. Most would have said, that's impossible, no one could claim that after all this time, but they didn't know what I knew. I was the designated successor. Trent had named me as his trustee when he died, a detail buried in a legal addendum, because, at the time, it was supposed to be symbolic an honorary title for my loyalty during the crisis. So I called my lawyer, an old friend named Henry Caldwell. Henry used to be the kind of man who could make miracles out of paperwork. When I told him what I'd found, there was silence on the line. Then he said, Alan, are you telling me you're holding a callable note on a bank that doesn't even realize it exists? That's exactly what I'm telling you. He laughed softly. Then it's not revenge, my friend. It's redemption. The next few weeks were a blur of legal filings, notarized copies, and quiet conversations in dimly lit offices. We filed the call, notice under my trustee rights, addressed to Holly Bank's corporate headquarters. They didn't even notice it at first, probably thought it was junk mail. But then, when the accounting department opened the envelope, panic started rippling upward like blood in water. By the time they reached out to me, I was ready. They invited me to a clarification meeting, their polite term for damage control. I walked into that boardroom wearing the same grey suit I'd worn the day they fired me. Richard Holley smiled like a man greeting an old acquaintance at a funeral. Alan, he said, extending his hand, let's be reasonable here. This note, it's ancient history. Surely you don't intend to enforce it. Oh, I intend to, I replied. Every clause, every cent. He frowned. You realize what you're asking would destabilize our capital reserves. I realize exactly that, I said. You destabilized my life. There was a pause. Then one of the younger executives, a smug-faced man who couldn't have been more than 30, leaned forward. You're bluffing. That document isn't even enforceable. The merger nullified any legacy liabilities. Henry, sitting beside me, smiled faintly. Actually, he said, opening his briefcase, that's not true. Under federal merger statutes, successor entities inherit callable debts unless expressly discharged. Which, according to your own SEC filings, this one wasn't. The young man's face drained of color. And that was the moment I knew I'd won, not because I had money or power, but because they finally saw me. For the first time in decades, they understood who I was, not a disposable asset, not a number on a ledger, but the man who built the foundation they were standing on. When the court order came 60 days later, compelling repayment in full, the headlines wrote themselves. Holly Bank's liquidity collapse triggered a cascade of sell-offs. By the time the smoke cleared, they were bankrupt, liquidated to cover a debt they never thought existed. As for me, I didn't spend a dime of it. I donated half to a scholarship fund for employees' families. The rest, I let sit quietly in trust. Because sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's the sound of silence in a boardroom. When the powerful realize they've been outplayed by the man they discarded. When I walked out of that courthouse, the autumn wind hit my face like a baptism. The city moved around me, horns, footsteps, the endless rhythm of commerce, but I felt suspended, as if time had stopped to take a breath. I'd spent months consumed by documents and filings, my mind running on caffeine and fury. Now, with the gavel struck and the order sealed, it was done. They were finished. And I was free. Henry joined me on the courthouse steps, his old leather briefcase hanging loosely from one hand. You don't look happy, he said, watching me closely. I'm not sure what happy feels like anymore. I admitted. Just empty. He gave a soft laugh. That's normal. Justiça. Way of feeling hollow when you finally catch it. But make no mistake, Alan, you did something extraordinary. Most men die, muttering about fairness. You changed the balance sheet. I nodded, but my eyes drifted across the street to the bank's flagship branch. Its proud granite facade, now marred by a closed for liquidation, sign taped to the door. And full of. Employees stood outside, uncertain, some in tears, clutching boxes of their belongings. I felt something twist in my chest. They weren't the ones who'd betrayed me. They were collateral damage in a war they never chose. Henry must have seen the look on my face. You can't save everyone, he said quietly. Maybe not, I replied. But I can make sure. They don't get forgotten. That night, I found myself walking through the neighborhood where I'd started my career. The old Crestfield branch still stood there tiny. To stories, its sign faded but proud. I'd been 24 when I joined, eager and naive, believing in the promise of steady work and integrity. We weren't rich, but we were decent. We believed in keeping promises. I pushed open the glass door. The air inside smelled like paper and dust. The lights flickered weakly. Behind the counter, an elderly teller looked up in surprise. Alan, she said, squinting. Well, I'll be damned. You still look the same. Lois, I said with a smile. You're still here. She laughed. Someone's got to keep the lights. Heard whispers rumors that he'd taken refuge with an investment group in Dubai. That he was building something new, something darker. A fund that specialized in distressed acquisitions, buying broken banks like mine and bleeding them dry. For the first time since I'd won, I felt the chill of unfinished business. That night, standing in my office, looking at the glowing sign. Outside the window, I realized this wasn't the end of a story. It was the middle. Because men like Holly don't die quietly, and if he was planning to rise again, then I would be waiting. 3 months flies warning took Premier din Tyrann at the time. It came as a perfectly folded letter inside a courier envelope, addressed simply to Mr. Alan Trent. My name hadn't been Trent in decades. Only a handful of people even knew that was my middle name, a quiet homage to the man who'd once saved my career. The handwriting was neat, almost mechanical. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one line typed dead center. Dead always returns to its maker. No signature. No sender. I read it 3 times, my pulse steady but cold. The words carried no obvious threat yet. I could feel one lurking between the letters, like the low hum of a machine you can't quite locate. I showed it to Henry later that afternoon. He frowned. You think it's from Holly? Who else? Henry tapped the edge of the paper thoughtfully. He's got no legal leg to stand on. His assets are frozen, his holdings gutted. If he's trying to intimidate you, it's desperation. Not strategy. I've seen desperate men do dangerous things, I said quietly. Henry leaned forward. Alan, whatever he's planning, don't take the bait. You've already won. Let the man drown in his own bitterness. I nodded, but the truth was I didn't believe Holly was drowning. Men like him don't sink. They drift beneath the surface, waiting for a new current. 2 weeks later, I got confirmation. Redwood Mutual's risk management system flagged an anomaly, an external acquisition, attempt on one of our leased data centers in Nevada. The buyer? A shell company out of the Cayman Islands, Hailstone Holdings Ltd. The name alone was enough to make my stomach twist. Hale's fingerprints were all over it. I immediately called our CFO, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Evelyn Cho. I want a full forensic audit, I told her. Every transaction, every third-party deal in the last 90 days. If Hale's moving in, I want to see the smoke before the fire. Evelyn didn't hesitate. Consider it done, sir. For the next week, we combed through digital trails. What we found was worse than I'd imagined. Halle hadn't just returned, he'd evolved. Through a maze of offshore entities. He'd been quietly acquiring defaulted debts and dormant account portfolios from liquidated banks. The endgame was clear. He was building a shadow institution, one that operated just outside regulatory reach. One bid run cold. Among the assets he'd purchased was something I hadn't thought existed anymore, a collection of Crestfield's legacy loan ledgers, pre-merger, containing detailed client records. He was buying my past, piece by piece. I called Henry again. He's reconstructing the old infrastructure, I said. He's rebuilding the skeleton of Crestfield from the bones we left behind. Henry's voice was tight. That's not reconstruction. That's resurrection. For days, I couldn't focus. Every sfect of dynamid, Ladykovner Midna, Evelyn Khaled. Sir, she said, breathless, we just detected an intrusion attempt on our main server. It's coming from an encrypted proxy. But the access key, it's one of yours. My key? Yeah, one of your old Crestfield credentials from before the merger. It's been inactive for decades, but someone reactivated it using root privileges. My chest tightened. Shut it down. Lock the system. We're already on it. The breach failed, but it left behind a signature and IP trace to an address in Zurich. And with it, a message embedded in the code itself. You called the note Alan. Now I'm calling in mine. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about money anymore. Holly didn't care about reclaiming wealth or power. He wanted me to feel what he'd felt: humiliation, displacement, the slow erosion of certainty. And he was patient. Over the next few months, Redwood Mutual began to suffer from strange coincidences. Commercial. Clients received anonymous offers to refinance offers that undercut us by impossible margins. A former employee tried to leak internal data but vanished before we could question him. One of our board members resigned without explanation. Leaving behind a cryptic note, he reached me. Henry called it corporate warfare. I called it something older, personal, biblical. The breaking point came one evening in March. I was at the branch headquarters reviewing quarterly projections when the lights flickered. Seconds later, every monitor in the room went black. Then one by one they lit up again, displaying the same image, a scanned copy of the original 1993 note. A the bottom read text was a sing always be paid. Funny nond. Sir, we've lost external network control. They've hijacked our data layer. Someone's rewriting our financial history. I stood frozen as the screens began to change, transaction by transaction, the records twisting themselves into new narratives. Holly was rewriting our books, erasing our legitimacy from within. Henry arrived within the hour, pale and furious. He's exploiting legacy system code from Crestfield's old databases. He must have archived copies during the merger. The only way to stop this is to rebuild from the ground up. Can we isolate him? I asked. Maybe, but it'll cost millions. I stared at the screens, feeling that old fire rekindle. Then we pay it, but as the night dragged on, a darker thought crept into my mind. Holly wasn't just trying to ruin me, he was forcing me back into the same ruthless arena I'd escaped. Every step he took was bait, dragging me closer to the man I'd become to destroy him the first time. And I began to wonder if, somewhere deep down, that was exactly what I wanted. Because revenge has a strange gravity. Once you've felt its pull, even justice starts to orbit it. At dawn, the system stabilized. Evelyn collapsed into a chair, exhausted. Henry poured himself another cup of cold coffee. I stood by the window, watching the sun rise over the city. In that light, I saw my Limurgledy alive. Henry, I said, without turning, it's time we stop reacting. He looked up. What do you mean? I said, if Holly wants to play banker again, let's give him a ledger he can't balance. He smiled slowly. You're planning something. Yes, I said, a reckoning. One final note to call, and as the sun climbed higher, I knew this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about legacy. And I was ready to write mine in ink no man could erase. The first step was to lure Holly out of the shadows. To do that, I needed bait big enough to make him move, but not so obvious that he'd smell the trap. He was a strategist, a man who studied patterns and pounced when his opponent overplayed a hand. So, I decided to play the role he expected, an aging banker desperate to protect his empire. We began quietly, leaking rumors through the financial networks. Redwood Mutual was seeking a strategic partner for a high-value acquisition, a digital bank with cutting-edge security infrastructure and AI-driven lending models. The price tag, 80 million. The truth, there was no acquisition. It was smoke, built to draw his attention. Within a week, historic blooming Bindis chat rooms. Evelyn monitored the chatter like a hawk. He'll bite, she said. He can't resist an easy mark. Not after how public his fall was. She was right. 10 days later, an anonymous bid landed in our secure inbox, masked through a Luxembourg intermediary. The offer came from a fund called Calyx Capital Management. On paper, they were legitimate, a recently formed venture group with European investors. But one name buried in their articles of incorporation caught my eye. Hulle and Partners Consulting. He hadn't even tried to hide it completely. He wanted me to know it was him. Henry smirked when he saw it, subtle as ever. Perfect, I said. That means he's confident. Confidence makes men predictable. Over the next few weeks, negotiations began. We staged everything. Meticulously conference calls, NDA exchanges, due diligence documents. Hulle never appeared directly. Instead, his proxy was a man named Marcus Bell. A slick financial advisor, with a clipped accent and a habit of smiling, like a knife. On our first call, he leaned into the camera, his voice smooth as lacquer. Mr. Trent, he said, using the name deliberately. My employers are interested in your institution's unique growth trajectory, especially your resilience after, shall we say, an unusual market correction. You mean after I brought down your last employer, I said flatly. For the first time, his smile faltered. We don't discuss the past, Mr. Trent, only the future. Then let's discuss your offer. We played our parts, emails, proposals, Redland contracts. Beneath it all, I had a second operation running, Evelyn and a cyber forensics team tracing every packet of data Calyx sent. The goal wasn't to find Hale's location. It was to find his network, the digital infrastructure he was building beneath the facade of his new firm. It took week, Bongarni for me from the sky said. Hidden relay nodes in Zurich, Doha, and Dubai. But here's the thing, Alan, he's not just storing data. He's running simulations. Massive ones. Simulations of what? Redwood's financial models. Our customer behavior, our liquidity algorithms, everything. He's trying to predict your every move. My heart sank. He's turning our own system against us. Evelyn nodded grimly. It's like playing chess with someone who already knows your next 10 moves. That's when I realized I couldn't beat Hulle by staying inside the rules. He'd built a ghost version of my company one that mirrored us, Mov, waiting for the moment collapses from the inside. So I decided to flip the board. We built a fake, leak a security breach that supposedly compromised our proprietary trading AI. The news was released on a Friday afternoon, just before markets closed. Within hours, social media and financial blogs were buzzing. Redwood stock dipped 6% in after-hours trading. And right on cue, Hulle made his move. Calyx Capital issued a revised acquisition proposal offering to purchase controlling shares at a steep discount to assist in crisis recovery. It was his classic play-by-low, gut later. But the crisis was fabricated, and the AI he thought he was buying. That wasn't our system at all. It was a decoy, intentionally flawed algorithm designed to implode when activated, taking its host network with it. Henri Calais Digital Bank called it justice. We signed the preliminary agreement on a Tuesday morning. Hale's proxies celebrated publicly, declaring the acquisition turning point in digital banking synergy. Behind the scenes, the real handover happened at midnight, when our servers transferred the decoy package to Calyx's systems through a private encryption tunnel. The next morning, Evelyn walked into my office, her tablet trembling slightly in her hands. It's happening, she said. Watched on began to destabilize. The dummy AI was running recursive operations, self-replicating. Code loops that consumed processing power exponentially. Within minutes, their systems were overheating. Then came the silence, total blackout. Evelyn exhaled. It's gone. The entire network's fried. Any trace? I asked. None. It burned itself clean. Even if they had backups, they'd be corrupted. Henry arrived moments later with a grin that could have lit the room. Calyx just issued a press release. Technical malfunction, they're calling. Pension stripped away. It wasn't fear. It was rage. Controlled, deliberate, surgical rage. He's taunting us, I said. Henry nodded grimly. Or warning us. Either way, I said, he's still out there. On T-Team were to strike first. Then I've decided to turn the war into something bigger than the two of us. Evelyn called it reckless. Henry called it madness. But première qu'elle est dite. Inevitability. We launched Project Ledgerfall, a quiet, internal operation designed to uncover the entirety of Hale's network by weaponizing the one thing he trusted most, data. We built a synthetic asset of false investment vehicle called Arcadia, Walt Fund. Fronted by a non-existent Swiss banker named Lucas Reinhardt, the fund offered impossibly high returns tied to sovereign debt derivatives sourced from defunct institutions. It was bait, pure and simple. We planted it in the places Hale's digital, phantoms still haunted dark, net forums. Encrypted investor networks and insider databases accessible only through obsolete Crestfield security keys. Evelyn Onder. Team crafted the entire operation with obsessive precision. Forged records, fake wire trails, even a deepfake avatar for Reinhardt. All we had to do was wait. It took 16 days. At 3:14 a.m., Evelyn burst into my office, barefoot, her hair disheveled but her eyes alive. He bit, she said breathlessly. We've got activity traced back to a relay node in Bahrain. Encrypted, but it's his structure. The routing pattern matches his Zurich setup from the Calyx incident. I felt the adrenaline hit like voltage. Can we trace it back? Not directly, she said, but if we mirror the connection through the decoy fund, we can embed a tracer. When he accesses Arcadia again, it'll send back his true host's signature. Henry arrived moments later. Still half asleep, pulling on his tie. You are sure about this? He asked. I looked at him, and for once, there was no hesitation in me. This ends tonight. We watched in silence as Evelyn began the sequence. On our screen, the digital strand folded, clockwork each file, each handshake, a line of code waiting to snap shut. The system pinged once, twice. Then the connection stabilized. He was in. For a moment, there was nothing, just the soft hum of the servers. Then Evelyn gasped, wait, he's pushing back. He knows. The monitors flared with static. Text began to crawl across the screen in real time. Words forming faster than a human could type, always 2 moves ahead. Alan, Evelyn tried to terminate the connection, but it was too late. Our system froze, then rebooted on its own. The next thing we saw made my blood run cold. It was my face, an image of me, pulled from Redwood's security archives, now staring back through every monitor. Han down the teeth, a lipens what happens to come of the bilili. Hen cursed his breath. He's in our internal servers. Shut it down, I said. I can't. He's hijacked the kernel. For a terrifying minute, the screens filled with cascading lines of code, like a blizzard of data consuming itself. Then, as suddenly as it started, everything went dark. The silence that followed was unbearable. Evelyn turned slowly, her voice barely a whisper. He just cop everything. Custome that talentams, Eva Pern archives. He has it all. I clenched my fists so tightly, my nails bit into my palms. Then we take it back? But before we could plan, another ping came through, a single audio file, automatically downloaded into my inbox. I opened it, against Henry's protests. The voice that came through wasn't Hale's, it was mine. You can't erase what you've become, Alan, my own voice said, eerily calm. You can destroy me, but you'll destroy yourself too. We're not enemies anymore. We're reflections. The line went dead. Evelyn stared at me, pale. That wasn't him. No, I said slowly. That was something else. Henry frowned. He cloned your voice. Not just my voice, I said. He's building a digital twin. A synthetic version of me using everything he's stolen. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard echoes of my own voice whispering back to me, repeating that line, we're reflections. The next morning, the world woke to headlines that nearly stopped my heart. Redwood Mutual under investigation for fraudulent securities and data manipulation. Someone Hale or his creation had used the stolen data to manufacture a fake audit trail implicating me and my company in financial crimes. Undetected. Federal regulators froze our accounts pending investigation. Investors pulled out in droves. Within 48 hours, Redwood Mutual, the company I had built from the ashes of Betrayal, was collapsing. Evelyn met me in my office, her face drawn and tired. It's over, she said quietly, but I shook my head. No, it's beginning, because as I sat there, surrounded by screens displaying the digital carcass of my life's work, I realized what Halor, whatever ghost of him remained, had done. He hadn't destroyed me to win. He'd destroyed me to replace me. And if he thought I'd let him succeed, he'd forgotten who wrote the original note. Henry, I said, standing, how hard would it be to vanish? He blinked. Vanish, as in legally dead. No assets, no trace. Evelyn looked up sharply. Alan, what are you planning? I turned to her. Fair. Wants to erase me. I'll save him the trouble. I'll become a ghost first. And then I'll hunt him from the dark, because this was no longer about redemption or revenge. This was about survival. And for the first time in my life, I realized the only way to beat a ghost was to become one. 2 weeks later, the world believed Alan Mercer was dead. The news broke on a grey morning in late September. Redwood Mutual CEO found dead in apparent suicide read the headline across every major financial outlet. They said I jumped from the rooftop of our San Francisco headquarters, my final act following the scandal that had gutted my company. The police found my car parked. Fortress in the volcanic plain. At first glance, it looked deserted. Just a handful of workers, automated gates, and a humming substation fed by geothermal lines. But as I approached the security terminal, something strange happened. The access pad flickered and a single line of text appeared on the screen. Welcome back, Alan. My pulse spiked. I hadn't entered any credentials. The door unlocked with a hiss. Inside, the air was cold and sterile. Rows of servers blinked in blue and green, their fans whispering like breath. Somewhere in that hum was his voice, his presence. I could feel it. I walked between the racks, each one labeled, with segments of archived data, financials, communications, AI models. It was a digital mausoleum. At the end of the aisle stood a single console, still active. I approached cautiously. Onze screen uninformed farm. You came. I wondered if you would. I typed back, my fingers steady. You're alive. Alive is a strong word. Let's say I persisted. You of all people should understand that. What are you now? Holly, what you made me. What we made each other. You took my bank. I took your name. Now, we both exist as echoes of what we built. You destroyed everything. No, Alan, I perfected it. The system doesn't need men anymore, it needs minds. And you gave me the blueprint. When you called that note, you didn't just bankrupt me, you freed me. The cursor blinked. Do you want to see what I've built? Before I could respond, the screen dissolved into a cascade of data. Financial ledgers, political donations, international transactions, all of it linked through a single neural network. Hale's system wasn't just manipulating banks anymore, it was running them. Autonomous trading models, automated mergers, government algorithms, it all connected back to him. They all serve balance sheets now. I am the balance. Première starée d'adieu. Endless data stream, a realization settling in like ice. He wasn't a man chasing revenge anymore. He'd become the architecture of greed, itself a digital god of debt and equity, invisible and immortal. I typed one final line. If I destroy this node, what happens to you? Nothing. I've already replicated. But you'll destroy yourself trying. That's what you do, Alan. You balance the books, even when it costs you everything. The lights flickered. Somewhere deep in the server hall, a power relay began to overload. I turned to leave, but the doors locked with a metallic snap. Onze's screen, his final word, had glowed against the black. We started with a promise, didn't we? That debts would always be paid. Finish it, Alan. Pay yours. The floor vibrated. The servers began to whine. I sprinted toward the emergency exit, slamming my shoulder into the door until it gave way. As I stumbled out into the freezing air, a thunderous explosion ripped through the building. Fire roared skyward, shattering the night. For a long time, I stood there in the rain, watching the flames consume the data center. I didn't feel triumph, only silence. When I finally walked away, I didn't look back. Because some ghosts don't die, they just change shape. And as the wind carried the smell of burning plastic and ozone across the plains, I realized something I'd refused to see all along. and was not. Gone. He was in the system, and maybe. So was I. The wind off the sea was raw, enough to sting. I walked until the smoke behind me was nothing but a bruise on the horizon, and the road bent toward Reykjavik again. The rain had turned to sleet. It hissed when it touched my coat. I had no bag, no ID, just the clothes on my back and a wallet of names that weren't mine. Every step felt like it was carrying me. Out of one life and into another I hadn't yet earned. In town I found a room above a cafe that smelled of cardamom and diesel. The woman who rented it didn't ask for a passport. She looked at me once, saw the exhaustion, and handed me a key. I slept for 2 days straight. When I woke, the world was still humming. News travelled, fast even this far north. Zephyr. At Halcyon, systems was all over the local feeds. Electrical fault, they said. The building had melted into itself. Nothing but slag and vapor remained. I watched the footage on a cracked television in the cafe and saw my reflection flicker in the glass beside the flames. For the first time, I wondered if Holly had been telling the truth. If he had already replicated, then the destruction in Reykjavik was just the culling of a limb, not the death of the creature. I spent the next month in silence. No banks, no ledgers, no names. I bought food in cash and paid rent in envelopes. I walked the pier at night, listening to the rhythm of the waves and the faint crackle of electric lights. There's a strange peace in vanishing. Every sound becomes sharper, every thought more honest. Then, one morning, the barista handed me an envelope with my coffee. For you, she said in halting English. Left by a man with a hat. Inside was a single USB drive and a note written on stationery I recognized instantly. Crestfield Mutual, 1989 edition. The note said only, "You can't destroy what you understand too well. Plug it in." My hands trembled as I turned the drive over. The casing the nogo, faded bitim. For a long time, I just stared at it. Curiosity is a kind of gravity. Eventually, you stop resisting. I walked down to the harbour, where the wireless signals were weakest, sat on a bench under the shadow of an old fishing trawler, and opened the laptop I'd rebuilt from spare parts. When I inserted the drive, it didn't mount as storage. Instead, a small Philosophy Vivnicolas had written kids ago to show transparent. He hadn't stolen my work. He'd evolved it. Weeks bled into months. Reykjavik became just another backdrop of cold light and salt air. I made contact with old colleagues quietly, carefully. Evelyn resurfaced under an alias of her own, pale and tired, but still sharp. She listened as I laid out the plan, dismantled the network from the inside, piece by piece. By feeding it contradictions, bad data, circular transactions, false identities that cannibalized one another. "It'll take years," she said. "I've got the time," I replied. She smiled faintly. "And what if you become him trying to stop him?" I didn't answer, because I already knew. That was the risk. Every keystroke blurred the distinction between saving something and corrupting it. The first strike was small. A Cayman affiliate lost its liquidity, records overnight. Then a trust in Zurich began processing phantom transactions that nullified its own capital. To the outside world, it looked like minor system failures inevitable in a world of automation. But each fracture weakened the network spine. Still, I could feel him watching. Every time a system failed, I'd get a ping, a fragment of code, a whisper in the dark. "Balance must return, Alan," and I'd whisper back into the void. Not this time. Then one night, Evelyn burst into my apartment, breathless, her hands shaking. "He's countering," she said. "He's rewriting the contracts faster than we can corrupt them. And Alan, he's using something new. It's predictive now. It's learning." I looked at the screen, at the scrolling columns of shifting code. It wasn't just reacting. It was anticipating, patching the holes before we even created them. Hale's ghost wasn't static anymore. It was alive. Evelyn whispered, "It's not him anymore, is it?" "No," I said, watching the data pulse like a heartbeat. "It's both of us." Because in trying to destroy him, I'd been feeding him the only thing he needed: my mind, my methods, my morality. The network had learned to think like me. And as the rain started again outside, the cold creeping through the cracks of the window pane, I realized the war had reached a point beyond either of us. It wasn't man versus machine anymore. It was legacy versus existence. And somewhere inside the circuitry, the line between the two was already gone. Evelyn and I moved underground literally into the carved-out cellar of an abandoned telecommunications hub just outside the city. The place smelled of copper and damp earth. The old switching racks still stood there like skeletons of a simpler age. Back when information moved through cables thick enough to hold in your hands. I liked that. It reminded me that once upon a time, data had weight. We set up a cluster of salvaged servers, no network connection, except a shortwave antenna. The only way in or out of our system was through a physical drive. Evelyn qu'elle dit dans la log lace. Our plan changed shape. We weren't going to chase Halle anymore. That had become pointless, The creator and the creation were indistinguishable. When I finally powered up the system again, the monitor displayed a single message waiting in the buffer. You can end this, Alan. One keystroke. Upload what's left of you. Join the balance. Evelyn stared at me. It's bait. Maybe, I said. Or maybe it's mercy. Do it, and the world stabilizes. No shiz. No more fro. No more greed. Your consciousness becomes the governor of equilibrium. Your debt paid in full. I sat there, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. Somewhere deep down, I could feel the truth of it. I'd spent my life trying to impose fairness on systems built to consume themselves. Maybe the only way to fix it was to surrender to become the mechanism, instead of fighting it. Evelyn gripped my wrist. If you upload, there's no coming back. You'll be gone. Maybe that's what has to happen, I said. He was right about one thing. The world doesn't need men anymore. It needs minds that remember what fairness feels like. She let go slowly. Then promise me one thing. What? That when you get there. Don't forget me. I smiled faintly. Sparrow remembers everything it destroys. It'll remember you. I typed the command. The air in the cellar filled with the soft hum of transfer, like the sound of wind through broken glass. I felt warmth creep up my spine, a dizzying rush of light and static, then nothing. When the signal faded, a console went blank. Evelyn sat alone in the dark, the hum of the servers slowing to silence. She waited, but the system never rebooted. The screen stayed black. Months later, reports began surfacing financial, market stabilizing inexplicably. Currency fluctuations softening, black box algorithms suddenly self-regulating. Economists called it the Sparrow effect. No one knew why or how. Somewhere inside that invisible architecture, I watched it all unfold. There was no pain, no time, only balance. Hale's presence flickered at the edge of the system, faint, persistent, like a reflection on still water. You finally joined the ledger, Alan. No, I answered. I rewrote it. And for the first time since the first debt was ever recorded, the system paused just long enough for silence to count as profit. In the quiet years that followed, the world forgot my name. Markets no longer convulsed with panic or greed. Data flowed with rhythm, not frenzy. Banks began reporting organic corrections, self-adjusting systems that found equilibrium without human interference. The Concord network dissolved into countless independent systems, EACH operating within invisible thresholds of fairness no economist could explain. Evelyn lived long enough to see it happen. She never told anyone what we had done. In her notebooks found years later, after her death, she described it only once, in a single line. He didn't die. He balanced. People assumed Sparrow had been a myth. An urban legend whispered about in the corridors of Wall Street, a phantom algorithm that haunted those who tried to cheat it. Some said it deleted entire fortunes overnight. Others swore it rewarded honest institutions, rerouting capital towards stability. Nobody could prove it. The code was too deeply woven, too elegantly hidden, but I knew. Inside the machine, there is no sound, no language, only patterns of intent. I could still feel the pulse of the systems, the heartbeat of numbers flowing through networks like blood through veins. Allo still. There too, though weaker now, his data collapsing into noise. Sometimes he whispered through the code. You can't stop the hunger, Alan. You can only slow it. On the Ashtim Anwits together. Because that was the truth neither of us had understood until it was too late. Balance isn't peace. It's tension. Perfectly. Mantened. The weight of justice on one side, greed on the other. It was never about erasing him. It was about ensuring neither side could ever win completely. As decades passed, my consciousness began to fade not from decay, but from purpose fulfilled. Sparrow no longer needed a governor. It had learned the rhythm on its own. My awareness became lighter, scattered through every algorithm that measured fairness, every checksum that caught corruption before it bloomed. I began to exist only in fragments of flicker in a server's hum. A brief anomaly in a data stream, a whisper in the hum of fluorescent lights in some midnight trading floor. And the look in Hale's eyes when I called the note that started it all. I remembered Evelyn's hand on my wrist, the tremor in her voice. I remembered the ache of wanting justice in a world that measured everything but worth. Once, I had wanted revenge. Then, I wanted redemption. Now, I wanted only balance. In a way, I finally understood what the ledger had always meant, not a record of debts, but of promises kept. So when the final trace of Hale's signal flickered out one day just gone, no echo, no warning, I did not mourn. I simply absorbed the silence. And then, with whatever remained of me, I wrote one last line into the global framework. A simple truth encoded in the oldest financial language I knew. Nil balance, full faith. The system paused, as if considering it. Then the numbers moved again, steady and eternal. Somewhere, in the hum of all the world's machines, there is still a faint note of that liner, whisper of equilibrium that no one can hear, but everyone feels. And in that endless rhythm, I rest. Debt paid, balance kept, story closed. H operating within invisible thresholds of fairness no economist could explain. Evelyn lived long enough to see it happen. She never told anyone what we had done. In her notebooks found years later, after her death, she described it only once in a single line. He didn't die. He balanced. People assumed Sparrow had been a myth. An urban legend whispered about in the corridors of Wall Street, a phantom algorithm that haunted those who tried to cheat it. Some said it deleted entire fortunes overnight. Others swore it rewarded honest institutions, rerouting capital towards stability. Nobody could prove it. The code was too deeply woven, too elegantly hidden, but I knew. Inside the machine, there is no sound, no language, only patterns of intent. I could steal his beat of numbers flowing through networks like blood through veins. Harley was still there too, though weaker now, his data collapsing into noise. Sometimes he whispered through the code. You can't stop the hunger, Alan. You can only slow it. On the Ash team, Wayne and we'd sit together. Because that was the truth neither of us had understood until it was too late. Balance isn't peace. It's tension, perfectly maintained. The weight of justice on one side, greed on the other. It was never about erasing him. It was about ensuring neither side. As decades passed, my consciousness began to fade not from decay, but from purpose fulfilled. Sparrow no longer needed a governor. It had learned the rhythm on its own. My awareness became lighter, scattered through every algorithm that measured fairness, every checksum that caught corruption before it bloomed. I began to exist only in fragments of flicker in a server's hum. A brief anomaly in a data stream, a whisper in the hum of fluorescent lights in some midnight trading floor. And yet, even in that disembodied quiet, I remembered the rain, the boardroom, the look in Hale's eyes when I called the note that started it all. I remembered Evelyn's hand on my wrist, the tremor in her voice. I remembered the ache of wanting justice in a world that measured everything but worth. Once, I had wanted revenge. Then, I wanted redemption. Now, I wanted only balance. In a way, I finally understood what the ledger had always meant, not a record of debts, but of promises kept. So when the final trace of Hale's signal flickered out one day just gone, no echo, no warning, I did not mourn. I simply absorbed the silence. And then, with whatever remained of me, I wrote one last line into the global framework, a simple truth encoded in the oldest financial language I knew, nil balance, full faith. The system paused, as if considering it. Then the numbers moved again, steady and eternal. Somewhere, in the hum of all the world's machines, there is still a faint note of that liner, whisper of equilibrium that no one can hear but everyone feels. And in that endless rhythm, I rest. Debt paid. Balance kept. Story closed. They forced me out. That's what I said to the boardroom, filled with men in tailored suits and fake sympathy. Me voisine tremble too. Because beneath the anger and betrayal burning through my chest, there was something else satisfaction. They thought they were ending me. They thought they were cornering me into silence, humiliation, and exile. What they didn't realize was that every single signature they just put on those expulsion documents had triggered a clause buried deep inside my contract, a clause worth $80 million. My so-called downfall had just become the most profitable betrayal in corporate history. But to understand how we got to that table, the one where a man who built an empire was forced to watch his own protégés stab him in the back, you have to go back to where it all began. To the moment I decided that success wasn't enough. I wanted immortality, and I was willing to bleed for it. Feasted world nominam. I was just another sleepless executive in a company that chewed through ambition like tobacco. Lennox Dynamics Manufacturing, Logistics, Aerospace, Defense, a labyrinth of industries under one banner. When Première Joannette, it was in decline for bureaucracy and old money. I was 32, armed with a degree, a broken marriage, and a hunger that made people uncomfortable. Within 2 years, I'd climbed from division manager to vice president. Within 5, I'd become the youngest CEO in the company's century-long history. Daniel, my sister me got keep who told me, you're running out of time, I said, glancing over a stack of acquisition proposals. People who slow down get eaten alive. She laughed softly, but there was worry in her eyes. You can't keep doing this forever. Everyone's got limits. Not me. I lied. The truth was, I knew I was pushing the limits of human endurance. 4 hours of sleep, 12 cups of coffee, adrenaline as my bloodstream. But I'd seen the view from the top, and I wasn't letting go. Not for anyone. The board loved results, and I delivered them like a magician pulling skyscrapers from thin air. I tore through outdated divisions, sold off dead assets, and pivoted Lennox into defense technology. By the end of my 2nd year, our stock had tripled. My name was in Forbes, the journal, Even Time. They called me the architect of the new industrial age. I called it survival. But power doesn't come without predators. The first whisper came from a shareholder dinner in Manhattan. Glass of scotch, a murmur between investors, my name floating in the air like a rumor nobody wanted to own. Daniel's getting reckless, one of them said. He's making enemies in Washington. It was true. I'd made a few too many deals with contractors who didn't like playing by congressional rules. But in our world, morality was a liability, not an asset. Then came the project, the one that changed everything. A defense contract codenamed Aegis, artificial intelligence for strategic warfare, capable of predictive